team of Berlin Technical University with mainly original stones and showing the point here. Therefore, they did reconstruct it like a Gothic arch. The plan of Tweekong is, of course, similar to some churches, the largest of which is the Church of Moses on Mount Nebo, which already in the earliest phase apparently shows this very similar construction, even in the outer forms. Still, it means to us that the Tweekong had been used for an imperial ceremonial used by the Caliph in his ways. The idea of the facade with its triangles was found in Samarran stucco work, but unfortunately the triangles in Meshata facade are up to nearly 5 meters of height, whereas the stucco motif reconstructed by Ernst Herzfeld, it's not preserved in the original, is just 80 centimeters. But still it has the hexagonal and the lobed medallion sequence in triangles, and it may be a distant remembrance to such a construction. Otherwise, the facade as it stands now in Berlin Museum in a rather narrow surrounding is unique, and the triangles remain unique for our art historical comparison. Now for the figurative, for the sculptures. In our view, a kind of unity can be detected in the figurative program, and I would call it a program according to my theory about the arcades. And I think these triangles seem somehow to frame a message which was formulated in a program starting on the left-hand side. First, we have a look at the entrance to which these triangles lead from both sides, which is unfortunately narrowed down in the museum, but it will be reconstructed. My successor has a wonderful program, set up a wonderful program, and hopefully one will allow him to use the space available in the museum and not leave it to some museum nostalgia where the rooms are more valuable than the objects in them. It starts and it ends with these very strange Sima motifs springing out of the walls. Here is the half tower of the wall around the whole palace, and also here is the next half tower. And the Sima springs out of the wall, jumps up, and frames the whole facade. Here also the same, just that on the right-hand side, in this historical photograph of 1903, where it was still preserved on spot, on the right-hand side, none of the triangles was built further than the first row of medallions, line of medallions. Quite a strange reconstruction, makes the facade a bit smaller, for nothing really remaining in it, but we should not remember it too often. We start with just having a general view of some motives in the left-hand side triangles, where animals like birds and some mythical and real animals are represented in typical fashion. They are at the beginning brought into nearly geometric forms, like here into these intertwined circles, here a bit freer into sort of scrolls, very similar to the scrolls of the mosaics in the Dome of the Rock I was showing at the beginning. Some of the animals you can recognize as showing forms in Iranian tradition, the Sasanian sea morgue, the gigantic mythical bird. Or the griffin. The griffin is very well recognizable with its 4 legs and the bird's head, whereas the sea morgue, he started the same way, the sculptor, and suddenly he noticed, oh gosh, a sea morgue has only 2 legs. It was too late. The rump was already extended, so he made a little, it looks like a pig's tail, instead of the hind legs of this animal. Still, it has its typical Iranian feature. And we see also a lion and a bull. I will come back to this in a minute. Some other mythical creatures. I should point out to you this fine centaurus, which doesn't show a militant form, but is rather peaceful, like an astrological figure. On the other hand, again, lions and mythical griffins. Now, 2 triangles which are not following each other. The left one is on the left-hand side, part of the facade, the right one on the right-hand side facade. And all those triangles on the right-hand side have no animated figures represented. They have scrolls, and the scroll work is differentiated from the scroll work in the left-hand side. Here we have vines in a natural form, I would say, whereas here the stylization has taken the place and is forming the scrolls into ornamental forms. I would say the vines on the left are closer to nature. Still, vegetal plants and vegetal motifs do not count as animated, neither in early Christian art nor in Islamic belief and the Islamic encyclopedias on animals and similar. We look into some more of these stylized forms, and you can imagine why the German art historians were rather bored by them. They didn't know this way of representation, and they had the impression this will take a long time to study. Maybe they were interested in some signs which again show Sasanian forms, and one was very much interested in following up the history of motifs and not so much in the idea why these triangles were now represented in this way. The first explanation done by Ernst Herzfeld already was that on the right-hand side, a room behind the facade was detected to have been used as a mosque. It has a now reconstructed prayer niche. Maybe that looked really like that, I doubt it, but one has the impression it was never in use. Still, the artists who designed the subjects for the triangles were thought to have taken respect, or to have respected the religious formulation that the representation of figures is not really helpful for the artist. There's nothing like the prohibition of images in early Islam. This is only formulated much later, but in this era of experiment, as I said, I think we need to look for another explanation than just the former feature of a mosque behind it to prevent the representation of living figures. The combination of motives on these last triangle forms is really fascinating. You see geometric forms, you see quite a different view of plants. They are not scrolls anymore, they are real plants, but with unreal forms of leaves and ornamental devices which we cannot interpret at the moment, where one really needs more comparative material which doesn't really exist. One would look for them in the Iranian milieu. As we know from Abbasid chronicles, the Umayyads were accused of having an Iranian taste, and the forerunner, the uncle of the named Walid II, the Caliph Hisham, was blamed for having his body embalmed in the Sasanian way, and so the Abbasid revolution destroyed his mausoleum and somehow desecrated his body. Some drawings have recently been done which show the probable original form of the scrolls and of the motifs. So I just follow a few comparable items for your imagination of Sasanian motifs represented here. The griffin I had mentioned, and even the vessels represented, the vases, which one would really believe must have been colored. Now we have looked very carefully into this. The facade does not show any signs of original coloring, but a mosaic from the same Mount Nebo churches shows us that such a vessel with very similar forms was of colorful glass and not only in silver. Other vases, no, that's the same, sorry, show animals of a very strange form, which we cannot really decipher. Volkmar Enderlein thought this is perhaps the hare and fox opposed to each other. I'm not so sure. This does not look very much like a rape animal, but rather like a cozy cat or something more friendly. Rather